While I was away on business, my parents put my son on a plane with a fake guardian form and sent him to a shelter for troubled boys. When I returned, they said, "We are not cut out to raise someone else's mistake." What I did shocked them. I came back from a 3-day business trip to find out my parents had put my 8-year-old son on a flight across state lines with a forged guardian form and dropped him at a shelter for troubled boys. No warning. No explanation. Just gone. They didn't lose him. They got rid of him. The shelter called me while I was still at the airport in Chicago. At first I thought it was a scam. Then they gave me his full name, birth date, and the name of the woman who claimed to be his guardian. My mother. They said she dropped him off saying I couldn't handle him anymore, and that he'd be safer in a facility that could fix boys like him. Like he was broken. I don't remember how I got on the next flight home. I don't remember how I made it through TSA or what I told my boss. All I remember is Ryan's face in my mind and the weight in my stomach like I'd swallowed a brick. I trusted them. Paid them. Left my son with them thinking at the very least they wouldn't do something criminal. They knew what they were doing. They planned it. Printed fake documents. Bought a one-way ticket in his name. They even packed him a small duffel bag like it was some weekend camp. The shelter had placed him in a shared room with older boys, one of whom had been brought in for starting fires. Another had stabbed a teacher with a pencil. And my son was there because my parents decided they didn't want to be inconvenienced anymore. When I finally got to him, Ryan didn't cry. He didn't ask questions. He just walked toward me and said, "Are we going home now?" And I had to choke back the guilt that I'd left him with people who saw him as a mistake. That night I drove straight to my parents' house. I didn't call first. Didn't knock when I got there. I used the key they'd forgotten I had. They were in the kitchen eating dinner like nothing had happened. My mom looked up, barely surprised. My dad didn't even glance my way. "You're back early," my mom said. I didn't say anything. She added, "We thought maybe this would finally push you to make the hard decisions." I looked at both of them and said, "It already has." They didn't understand what I meant. Not yet. But they would. The next morning I met with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Someone who specialized in child welfare and criminal fraud. I laid out every detail. The shelter intake forms with my mother's forged signature, the airline records, the texts. I even had the bank statements showing I'd been paying my parents every month for the last 2 years to help care for Ryan during my business trips. He looked at everything, then leaned back and said, "We have a case." It hit me then. I was going to take my own parents to court. Not in a bitter family drama kind of way. In a real, legal, public way. For what they did to my son. People assume you don't cross certain lines. That there's a boundary between family and the rest of the world. But my parents crossed it first. What they did wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. I filed 2 lawsuits. One for document forgery and unlawful guardianship transfer, and another for emotional and psychological damages caused to Ryan. The DA opened a criminal investigation a week later. When the police showed up at their door to question them, my mom called me. This time I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail saying I was being dramatic and needed to let it go for the family's sake. I sent the voicemail straight to my lawyer. They thought they were untouchable. That no one would dare press charges against their own parents. That I'd stay quiet out of shame or fear of what people would think. But I kept going. Ryan had started asking questions at night. Why did Grandma say he wasn't wanted? Why did they send him to a place with boys who hit each other? Why did no one come for him for 2 whole days? I told him the truth. Not every detail. But enough. Because if I wanted him to grow up knowing his worth, I had to show him what you do when people try to erase it. The court date was set for 3 months later. My parents pleaded not guilty. Their lawyer claimed they acted out of concern, that I was an absent mother and they feared for Ryan's safety. They were trying to flip the story. Make it about my work travel, my single parenting, my choices. But the evidence told a different story, and I had more than they expected. Way more. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, just the way people looked at us when they realized it was a daughter pressing charges against her own parents. You could feel the judgment from every row of benches. But I didn't flinch. Their defense team tried to paint a picture of chaos. Said I left Ryan with them too often, that I was never around, that my parents had acted out of desperation. They even claimed Ryan showed behavioral problems, like that somehow justified what they did. Then came my lawyer's turn. He opened with the airline footage. My mother at the gate with Ryan handing over fake documents. The airline rep taking the forged guardianship form without knowing. The timestamp, the signature, the smirk on my mom's face like she was dropping off a package she no longer wanted. Then came the shelter intake logs. My mom wrote that I had relinquished all custody rights, signed in shaky handwriting that didn't match mine at all. They recorded her saying Ryan wasn't safe to have around other children. My lawyer asked, "Is this the behavior of someone doing the right thing, or someone covering their tracks?" Silence. Then he pulled out the text. The one my mom sent me after everything. "We are not cut out to raise someone else's mistake." It hit like a bomb in the courtroom. My mom didn't look up. My dad just stared ahead like none of it mattered. Then came the real surprise. A former neighbor of theirs took the stand. An older woman who sometimes watched Ryan when my parents couldn't. She testified that my mom told her months earlier she was sick of the kid and wished he would disappear for a while. She also said my parents joked about teaching Kate a lesson. That's when it shifted. The courtroom wasn't on their side anymore. Then Ryan's therapist took the stand. She talked about the nightmares, the anxiety, the way he flinches now when someone raises their voice. How he thought for 2 days that I abandoned him. The damage wasn't just emotional, it was real, documented trauma. By the time my parents took the stand, they had nothing left to hold on to. My mom tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but the judge wasn't buying it. My dad barely said a word. The verdict came quickly. Guilty of document forgery. Guilty of unlawful child endangerment. And guilty of intentional infliction of emotional distress. The judge ordered them to pay compensation. Not just to me but to Ryan. He said, "This child was treated like a burden instead of a person. And that deserves justice." My parents sat there in total disbelief. Like the world had turned upside down. But no, it had just corrected itself. Winning in court didn't feel like winning. The verdict was clear. My parents were found guilty of forging legal documents, endangering a child and inflicting emotional harm. The judge ordered them to pay compensation directly to Ryan, something that visibly shook them. But what shook me more was what came after. That's when the masks really came off. I expected silence from them. Instead I got a letter. 3 pages typed, mailed to my new apartment. No apology. Not even close. Just 3 pages of blame. They called me vindictive. Claimed I was brainwashing my own son. Accused me of humiliating them for attention. My father wrote that the real mistake wasn't what they did to Ryan. It was allowing me to keep him in the first place. I ripped the letter in half and burned it in the sink. That was the beginning. Then came the calls. Not from them, they knew better by then, but from extended family, people who hadn't spoken to me in years. Suddenly I was the villain of some tragic family story. According to the version circulating, I'd abandoned Ryan with my aging parents and they had no choice but to place him somewhere safe. They left out the part about the forged documents. They left out the part about putting him on a plane alone without my knowledge and lying to the state. They left out the part about the shelter. And I didn't bother defending myself. I wasn't going to argue with people who decided the story they liked better was the one where I was the problem, because it kept them from facing who my parents really were. Even worse. The judgment from strangers. People who heard bits and pieces. Online articles that left out key facts. A local parent from Ryan's old school sent me a message. "I hope you can forgive them. Family is everything." No. Family isn't everything. Integrity is. Ryan was trying to rebuild piece by piece. And I wasn't going to let anyone drag him through this mess again. I took unpaid leave from work for 2 months just to be there for him. We moved to a small coastal town where no one knew our names. He started therapy twice a week. I sat in the waiting room, every single time, just to make sure he knew I wasn't going anywhere. He didn't ask about my parents anymore. He stopped mentioning their house, their dog, the backyard with the plum tree he used to climb. It was like he'd quietly filed them away in a drawer he didn't want to open. But I hadn't forgotten. One day I got a call from a lawyer handling their assets. Apparently, my parents had decided to contest the compensation ruling, claiming financial hardship. They wanted to reduce the payment. They said the ruling was unfairly harsh for 2 elderly people who made a mistake. They were still calling it a mistake. So I did something I didn't think I would. I countersued. Not for more money, I didn't need it. But for a restraining order. I wanted it in writing. I wanted it legal. No contact. No loopholes. The judge granted it. My parents weren't allowed to approach me or Ryan in any capacity. No visits. No letters. No third-party messages. Not even on holidays. That was the real win. Not the money. Not the public apology that never came. It was the wall. The legal, permanent wall I built between the people who raised me and the son they tried to erase. I started over after that. New town. New job. New rhythm. I stopped calling them my parents. Ryan stopped calling them anything at all. And slowly, for the first time in years, our home felt like ours. Quiet. Safe. Whole. But I still kept that first letter they sent after the trial. Not out of bitterness. Not to fuel anger. But to remember what silence almost cost me. And what speaking up, even against blood, saved. About 6 weeks after the restraining order was granted, something happened that I didn't see coming. Their neighbor, a woman named Lisa who had known them for over 20 years, called me. She said she'd seen what happened in court and had been waiting for the right moment to tell me what she knew. She said my parents had been talking about getting rid of Ryan for months. That the plan had been brewing for a while, only they hadn't figured out how to do it without drawing attention. My mom told her over coffee one afternoon that she couldn't stand looking at that boy anymore, and that Kate needs to be scared straight. That phrase stuck with me. Scared straight. They thought by dumping Ryan they'd teach me some kind of twisted lesson. That I'd come crawling back, desperate, apologizing for making them part of my life, for having a child they never wanted to acknowledge in the first place. Lisa also told me they'd been lying to their friends, claiming I was an addict. That I'd abandoned Ryan completely and left them with no resources. That they were heroes for stepping in. The same people who had been guilt-tripping me were starting to realize they'd been lied to. Slowly, people who'd cut me off after the trial began reaching out again, awkwardly apologizing. Not because they were truly sorry, but because their version of the truth was falling apart. Then came the article. A local investigative journalist had followed the court case. She ran a piece that told everything. The forged papers, the shelter, the lies, the verdict. It didn't name Ryan, but it didn't have to. People knew. My parents were quoted briefly, but the quotes only made them look worse. And once that went public, their world started shrinking. Their country club dropped them. The church committee they sat on quietly asked them to step down. Even their retirement association sent a letter saying their behavior reflected poorly on the community. I didn't celebrate any of it. I didn't need to. The damage wasn't about reputation. It wasn't about court orders or public opinion. It was about the fact that my son was left in a room full of strangers who weren't safe. All because two people decided they were tired of being grandparents. What they didn't realize was that Ryan remembered everything. One night he told me he knew they weren't coming back. He didn't cry. He just said it like a fact. And then he asked if we could make pancakes for dinner. So we did. I let him pour the batter, flip the pancakes, get flour on the floor. He smiled more that night than I'd seen in weeks. I let him stay up late watching a movie, curled up under a blanket with the dog. And when I tucked him in, he whispered, "I like it better now." He wasn't talking about the pancakes. He was talking about our life. The life I fought for. The one they tried to take from us. And I wasn't done yet. It's been a year since the trial. A year since I stood in court and told a judge what my own parents did to my son. People always ask if it gets easier after something like that. The truth is, it doesn't need to get easier. It just needs to be over. And it is. I changed my number. Shut down the old email account. I sent out one final message to everyone who had taken my parents' side. You believed a lie. I won't be around to fix your guilt. Ryan and I started over in ways I didn't even expect. He joined a kids' robotics club. His therapist said he's been talking more, sleeping through the night. Sometimes he still draws pictures of a house with 3 stick figures. Me, him, and our dog. He never draws grandparents. Not anymore. One afternoon I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew who it was from. I didn't even open it. I tossed it into the trash, walked straight back inside and sat down with Ryan to help him build a Lego castle. I made peace with something that day. There are people in this world who will never say sorry. People who will hurt you and then act like they were the ones betrayed. People who will look at an 8-year-old boy and see a burden instead of a person. And sometimes those people are the same ones who raised you. I don't care who shares their blood with me. They tried to throw away my son. So I threw away them. They'll grow old without visits. Without photos. Without calls on holidays. They'll live with what they did, not just to me but to the one innocent person they should have protected above all else. But I won't live with it. Not anymore. Because I'm not angry now. I'm free. Ryan has a future. I have peace. And they have each other. Let them rot in the silence they built. We're done.